Welcome to the Beasts Who Made Us podcast. I'm Cori, a dog trainer from Chicago. You may also know me as Venus and Mars Canine, and I talked today with Sarah Shapiro-Ward of the Dog School. Sarah allowed me to ask her about her horse so that I could achieve my goal of having some non-dog animal talk on this show, and that was a very interesting conversation because Sarah is clicker training this mare, and that is by no stretch of the imagination the norm in the horse world right now. We also talk about Doodles because she owns one, as well as some issues and misconceptions in the world of quote-unquote positive reinforcement dog training, and horse training too. So I think this episode has a little something for everyone, because if you don't want to hear about clicker training horses or the infamous designer breed that has been forsaken by its creator, I frankly don't know what would entertain you. Here's the episode.
When Percy started pulling these weird behaviors on me, I was like, I should learn more about this. And that's when I really started learning about training in general, but also how, like, you think you're doing one thing and something else is at play.
Yeah, many such cases. I feel like a lot of times we have, I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but like people have instincts, like natural instincts that sometimes clock that, and then some of the schooling that we get or some of just like the common dog training rhetoric can convince us that our gut instinct is not true.
It's wrong.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
I remember being a baby trainer and just being convinced of thinking of everything in a formula, and then you'd be like, wait, but isn't this happening? And the trainers you're learning from are just like, no, don't think that. It's just not true.
Yep. I think that the really good trainers out there are quite creative, and so they see the rules as like kind of gentle guidelines, and they still do all of their other stuff within the framework. And then when we're teaching new people, we're like, this is the framework. And then our new people are like, well, there's nothing else to it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, there is more to it. There's like this whole other creative side of things. Like, even when you look at shaping, some people are out there with a very rigid plan. And it's just like, nobody's actually doing it. Who is a good trainer is actually doing that exactly as it's being written.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry. I read the Dr. Karen overall relaxation protocol again recently, and I was like, nobody is actually doing this. Nobody is doing this step by step. My name is Sarah Shapiro-Ward. I run a dog training school in Vancouver, BC called the Dog School. And I have my KPA, my Karen Pryor Academy Certified Training Partner. I also have the CPDTKA, which is the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers. And I have my CTDI, but you can leave that one off because that is not relevant to this podcast.
What is the CTDI again?
It's the trick dog one.
Oh, got it. You're like, I did all this school and also I can evaluate tricks.
Yeah, and also I can evaluate tricks.
Yeah.
And,
anyway. Are you a CGC evaluator too?
No, I'm not.
Oh, wow. Okay. Never mind then. If you want to prove that your dog can behave, Sarah can't help you. Only with tricks. Well, I know you're a professional dog trainer and not a professional horse trainer, and you let me know beforehand that you wanted to make that clear, but I'm so desperate to talk even for a second about an animal who is not a dog, because that's just my dream for this podcast, is that sometimes we talk about other animals too. So, you have a horse, right?
I sure do. She's called Neve.
And that horse is not a dog.
No, she is not a dog. She is 980 pounds.
Yes, right. Yeah, they're a lot bigger. They can break your toes if they step on you. They're social in different ways than dogs are, and they're prey animals. But I know that you still do clicker training, and you do a lot of groundwork with your horse, because I've seen it on Instagram. So I'm curious if you can tell me, I'm curious about the feeling as well as the logistics, how it feels working with a horse, and if you want to get into any logistical details, you're welcome to too.
Yeah, I can get into a lot of that stuff actually. It feels very different. The first thing that you have to know about my horse is she's 2.5. which in dog years is like 16 weeks. It's a baby, tiny baby. So I'm not writing her. She knows nothing. And she's also got a lot of teenager puppy energy, which is somewhat chaotic. So normally when we have horses, they're like relatively placid compared to dogs. Like, I don't know. People will argue with me. They're on the whole, largely, generalization, horses are more calm than dogs. Generally speaking, not always. And then when you get a really high arousal one, it's a tough case. But for the most part, dogs are out here running about chomping things, like high prey drive, and horses are kind of just like tootling along for the most part. But baby horses are a different kettle of fish. They are very busy, and they're very pushy, and they're very playful. And they have no manners yet, and so there's a lot of that is going on in my training right now with her, whereas when I had my last horse, who was 20, she required a lot less management and, damage control of shenanigans. And it was a lot calmer and more peaceful in some ways. So even between horses, like the flavor or the feel of how the training is completely different. But I got my baby because I wanted to train a horse from scratch with R+. Most people that you see doing R+ training with their horses,
not everyone. I mean, it depends. But like a lot of people get their horse and they've already been trained. They're already 7, 8, 11 years old, 15 years old, and so they cross over into R+. And I really wanted a horse that hadn't had any of that aversive style training first, just to see how everything would work, and it was a bit of an experiment.
R+ training with horses is very different with dogs. Dogs live with you all the time, so you can kind of do like a minute here, 10 minutes there, and you spend a lot of time bonding with them where you're not actively training, whereas horses don't need you in the same way. My horse lives in a field with other horses, so I call her in for our like daily 10-minute, 20-minute training session, and then I put her away again. So our relationship is a little bit different just from that kind of setup. And then finally, the other crazy thing about training horses or clicker training with horses is that horses have really, really crazy food drive.
Wow.
Really? People don't believe me, but like horses are wild around food. To the point where people actually think R+ training with horses is quite dangerous because they become so food obsessed. Like, when you're training a dog that's got really high food drive and they get frustrated and they start throwing out all these crazy, like, jumping, mouthing, crying, barking behaviors because they just want the food so much. That's like every horse by default is like that.
I had no idea. I've never heard that before. And it's so funny, like, they're just going bonkers for, like, carrots and apples.
I know. And just hay pellets, like I use the lowest value treat for my horse, which is like Timothy pellets. And they're tiny as well. They're like the size of my last pinky finger knuckle. They're really small. And so she's out here weaving and bobbing and like excited about the food. And so the very first thing that you have to teach with horses is like be calm around food. And you do so much like drive adjustment training. Like in dogs, it would be like when you have a hyperarousal case and you're just working on that dog, like not humping you all the time or not pushing into you or jumping on you. That's kind of your first thing that you do with every horse is like, can you just stand still and chill for a second while I'm feeding you? There's no need to like run me over or try and rip open my treat pouch or try and like topple me and treat me like a human piñata. So that was quite an eye-opener for me. And then there's no tug as well. Nobody tells you this when you get a horse, but there's no like training through play that you can do safely. There are some games that you can play. There's lots of like pick up this or like go snuffle that or enrichment toys, but you can't like really get stuck into a game of tug like you can with a dog. And I think that that's really interesting for how your relationship builds because, with a dog, you're not worried about them jumping on you and crushing you to death, or like
and you
running around too fast.
Right, you wouldn't want to mimic any kind of like wrestling with a horse. This is
extremely
terrifying to imagine.
Yeah, if you watch them play it with each other in the field, they're biting and kicking and running around and rearing, and none of that behavior is acceptable with a human. So where you would use some of that social play behavior in dogs, you don't really want to encourage it between horses and people. So it's a very different flavor. That said, I have trained both ways. I've trained like the traditional way in horses as well. I do find that there's this thing that happens with clicker training where once your dog or your horse really understands the game of clicker training, they become really intelligent at solving puzzles, and you become very cooperative together. Like you have this partnership where it's you guys against the problem. Whereas when you're training a little bit more old, I'm not going to call it balanced because it's not balanced, it's old fashioned, you know, with like a lot more, you must do this because I'm the human and I told you so. And that's a lot of horse training. I really find that creates a horse who's like, but make me though. Like, I'm not going to do it until you really like escalate the cue to a point where I can't ignore it. And it becomes this adversarial, less cooperative partnership where you're really, and some people like that because they're like, oh, it's just a bit of sass, you know, my horse is kind of sassing me. And ultimately, I much prefer the cooperative stuff. So yeah, I'm having a great time. I'm having an absolute blast with my horse. I will say it is a bit of an experiment for me, but I know some really good clicker trainers of horses, and I've been able to learn a lot from them, especially about tackling food drive and making sure that my foundation is really good so that I don't get hurt later on. So that's been really necessary for me.
Wow, interesting. I totally was not expecting that answer. I hadn't thought about that stuff for some reason, even though I have a little bit of a horse background, mostly in my childhood. But I wonder, this might be kind of an insane comparison to make, but I actually do think it makes sense. I'm curious if you agree that this sounds similar, the R+ horse training thing. And so I'm sure you've seen that there are more and more people who are training, I almost said bite work horses, dogs in protection sports, with the goal of minimizing or completely avoiding the use of aversives in training. Or, you know, maybe these people are thinking about negative punishment, but they're at least deciding that they're not using prong collars or e-collars in their sport training. The majority of those trainers that I have encountered talk about their training like it's an experiment because it's so new to that sport world. And so like most of those trainers, in my experience, and I'm not saying that I know everyone and I've talked to everyone, but it's a pretty small community of people. Most of those people are saying, like, I'm not saying this is superior because the amount of people who have trained like this for the sport is so small compared to the people who have had the decades and decades to get the world's titles and all of this other stuff. So it's not like it would be silly to argue about it like the situation is any different. Is it similar to that in the horse world and everyone's kind of like we're in this big experiment together, or is it more established and combative?
No, it's definitely more like what you're describing in bite sports. I know nothing about bite sports, but that hits home because everyone's kind of, when you start learning to train horses R+, you always come from a crossover background because there's no such thing as riding lessons where things are R+, at least not in my area and probably not in yours either. There's maybe a handful of barns in the world who will teach you from nothing to like how to train a horse R+. It's to the point where I would be quite confident in saying that doesn't exist. So everyone who's going through this has a background in horses and in traditional training methods, and has kind of said, you know what would be really cool if I could take what I knew from clicker training dogs or clicker training from my other walk of life and translated it to horses. There are a couple of people out there who have really pioneered clicker training for horses. Trudy Dempsey is one of them. She's phenomenal. And so they've already been through some of the problems that occur, but there's, many people, when I start chatting with them about how things are going, they're facing all the same problems that I am, and that everyone is. We're all facing this crazy food drive problem, and people are tackling it differently, and we're all comparing notes, and we're like, and none of us are out here saying like R+ training is the best way to train horses, because we don't have a high enough N number yet. We haven't done this enough to know that it's going to pan out, things are going to work. Horses also live a really long time. And as I said, a lot of people who get into horses don't buy a youngster. They buy a horse who's already trained and is already rideable. Most people are not doing what I'm doing. And so there are a few of us, and there's a few professional horse trainers, not just like amateur people like me mucking about. But we all do kind of treat it as a bit of an experiment, because we're really passionate about how we train and the science behind what we're doing and like the methodology, and less about results. Like if you just want to get results, the tried and true methods work really well, and there's consistent like pathways to success that you can follow. So it's not really about that. It's about a passion for getting really nerdy about behavior. Things are progressing, and they're coming along, and there are some things that I've seen with my own two eyes where I'm like, this seems better than how we used to teach it. We'll just have to hold on for some more evidence before I think it's gonna become popular.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And you said, horses, you don't play tug with horses. It also made me think of, with dog training, we think about positive reinforcement with so many other low-key life rewards in a way that's not going to come up with horses, because it just doesn't translate, or because you're not living with them all day. So there's not as much opportunity to like reward your dog for polite behavior with some calm attention 24 hours a day. I guess in that example, you are awake all night, but yep. Like you're not so much like releasing your horse to sniff in an everyday way that you are with your dog. And so it's like you have less low arousal rewards available for your horse too.
Yeah, on the whole, there is like a really strong piece of advice in the horse world, which is like, just go out and hang with your horse and don't train. Like just get a book, sit in a corner of your stall and like chill out with them. And that is good advice, because that kind of is building back in some of this just presence, right? And interaction with no training pressure. Or because as you know, like when we set up a training environment for an exercise that we're doing, we are bringing in some drive and arousal, because that's what we want. And so if you were to only work with a dog when you're training, they would be kind of a different character than if you were around them all the time. They'd get really excited to see you. And it would be very different. So there is that advice of like, just go and hang out with your horse and build some time together where you're just hanging out and there's no pressure. And you can build some of that in. You can go for a walk, let your horse eat some grass. You can pet them. They love a scratch. So there's low arousal petting that you can do as well, that is like good for building a connection with them. And then on the flip side of that whole, downside to training a horse, there is a massive upside. And that massive upside is you are always in a controlled environment. With dogs, you're not always in a controlled environment. A lot of the time you go outside the door and it's chaos. But with horses, you set up your arena, you bring your horse into the arena, you're in a controlled setting and you can do your training. And then only when you feel like your behaviors are proofed enough, then you go to other locations. Like you don't have to test the proofing until you're really ready, which I think is not the case with dogs. Like dogs have to kind of be straight out there, like right out the gate, dealing with, urban environments or training schools or walks, where dogs run at them or squirrels are present. And you just don't really get that with horses. You're able to protect your setup a lot more precisely. And so you can really get nice, clean behaviors in your training exercises quicker than you can with dogs in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are you approaching desensitization, or like what would commonly be called desensitization, any differently? Because I remember as like an 11-year-old working with my horseback riding instructor a lot on like, you get the horse out and you're like, here's a plastic bag, and the horse is like, plastic bag, and then you're like, here it is again, and then the oh my god, I keep saying dog, and then the horse is like, a plastic bag, and then you bring it out a third time and the horse is like, I think it's fine actually. Are you still using that as just like rinse and repeat exercise, or are you approaching it with more, I don't want to say kindness, because I don't think that the other way is necessarily bad, though I'm not an expert, but yeah, are you doing that? Are you doing it differently?
I don't think I'm doing it that differently, actually. I think really good horse trainers really, really understand negative reinforcement in a way that really good dog trainers might miss sometimes. Because a lot of the time when the plastic bag comes out, it also goes away again when the horse is calm. And it's really a negative reinforcement protocol, not just a desensitization protocol. Totally. When horse people do it. That said, a lot of horse people do flooding. So if you're on TikTok or you're on Instagram, you'll see a lot of like, my horse spooked at this plastic bag, so now I'm making him wear it as a hat, and the horse just looks absolutely miserable. And it's pretty shocking, actually. So there's the whole gambit of horse trainers who go from flooding to desensitization all the way through to really clever use of negative reinforcement. And I do use negative reinforcement with my horse in that, like, I would bring out a plastic bag, and this comes from having like a controlled setup, right? So anything weird in the environment does tend to cause your dog to be more, or your horse to be more alarmed than a dog would be. Here's me saying dog instead of horse as well.
We're just so chopped.
Birds of a feather right now. But yeah, so because your space is so controlled, anything novel in that space is like, whoa, what is that? Whereas dogs, when they're outside, are like, oh, cool, a bag. Or like, oh, cool, a weird person doing push-ups. That's normal for Vancouver on the seawall. You know, like, they get really desensitized to that just by living in it. Whereas horses do tend to be like, whoa, what is that new thing over there? And so it is useful, and it's important for us to bring out stuff and be like, this is a plastic bag, or like, this is a saddle pad, this is a loud noise that sometimes my phone makes, these are a pair of clippers. You know, like, there's a lot of that we do, and I would say that for the vast majority, I'm using R- at like a really low level. You know, like, I'm bringing it in, my horse is noticing it and going, whoa, that's kind of weird, and then as soon as they're able to self-regulate in some way, you know, they show me through their body language that they're quite calm, and I'll take it away again. And in order for that to work, by the way, you have to use whatever thing you're presenting at a really low level, which is desensitization. So it's not just one or the other, it's both. If you produce the thing at a really high intensity and your horse freaks out, you've already failed at doing R-, because there's no reinforceable moment in that response.
Because they have to
I guess
be able to calm back down again to reinforce.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's both, right? It's like, you know how people pair desensitization and counter conditioning quite frequently? Mm-hmm. You bring in the thing at low intensity, which is the desensitization, and then you pair with something nice as the counter conditioning. It's basically that, except from, instead of pairing with something nice, you just remove the thing that is upsetting. Mm-hmm. So it's desensitization and whatever the negative reinforcement version of counter conditioning is. Yeah. Which is probably just counter conditioning, now that I think about it. Anyway.
Yes.
To answer your question, it's complicated.
Yeah. When I start to have vocabulary, semantic questions like that, I typically just stop thinking about it. No one cares about my answer anyway, usually. But maybe they will, now that I've started a podcast, and I'll have to actually finish those thoughts.
Figure out what's actually going on. I think in theory it's called the constructional approach. When like you read like scientific article, Yeah, so when you read the articles that are about this, it's called constructional approach, and I think that's what's building in like low intensity exposure, like the desensitization portion, plus the taking it away when there's a CAM response.
Right.
And that's the construction. So if we want the correct language, that is the correct language for it. I do know what it's called. It's called
Right.
that.
Okay, I'm
Sorry.
I'm jumping ahead because I think this is probably what I was going to ask you at the very end of the podcast too, but now it just feels I don't know your answer, and I'm genuinely curious how I feel like so many trainers who focus heavily on positive reinforcement or align with those labels are unwilling to talk about stuff like that, and would not be. I think there's a lot of people that would be surprised to hear that you're also using that like scary bag negative reinforcement drill that's so common in horse training. So like how do you, I don't want to say justify, but from like a labels perspective, how do you bring those concepts together beyond just saying like, I think both of these things are good and I'm gonna do my thing?
Yeah, I actually think, and I feel quite strongly about this, so I actually don't mind talking about it, but I actually feel like R- gets a really bad rap in the R+ dog training world, and if we are not using it, we are not good dog trainers. This sounds terrible. You're making me sound like I'm moving away from my background in positive reinforcement clicker training, and I want everyone to know, like, I am very positive reinforcement clicker training based. Like I am, that's my camp, you know, those are my people. But here's the thing, like I work with a lot of dogs who have quite serious behavior issues. And so when you're working with a dog with behavior issues, there's trigger, which causes the behavior. And when you are training a dog that has a trigger and an unwanted behavior, the trigger is aversive. So to give you an example, let's say you have a dog who like bites the groomer and you present the nail trimmers and the dog gets upset. The presentation of the nail trimmers is aversive to that dog. Now, I think where people get confused is I'm not saying like, and then I trimmed the dog's nails, because that's too far, right? That's no longer desensitization, that's now flooding. And I think R+ trainers are quite confident in their use of desensitization, so I don't think I need to explain the difference between desensitization and flooding too much. But when you apply a trigger and the trigger is aversive to the dog and you're applying it in a kind way with desensitization in mind, because it's still aversive, you also have the opportunity to take that away and help the dog to feel better. And I learned this very early on with counter conditioning, because with counter conditioning, you present the trigger and then you give the dog food or some other nice thing that they want in order to make them feel better about the trigger. And I found that a lot of my dogs would get stressed a couple of minutes into the training session. So we would present the trigger, we'd give food, or, you know, we'd go to the groomers and we'd give food, or the vets and we'd give food. We go to the skate park and we give food, and then, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes in, the dog is an emotional wreck. And I'm like, okay, well, we have to call this session and we have to start again. And so then, and at the time when I was learning all of these things, I was in a very positive reinforcement forward training school called When Hounds Fly. And so I would talk to everyone and they would say, well, you need to use a functional reinforcer, which is distance. You know, you need to be able to give the dog not only a food consequence, but also a functional reinforcement distance from the trigger. And so in my little R+ brain, I had those two consequences kind of down as both positive reinforcement. I let the dog see the trigger, and then I either take the trigger away, which is a functional reinforcer, or give the dog distance away from that trigger, which is a functional reinforcer, but that is just R-. And what that does, the role that functional reinforcer plays, is to make the dog feel safe. Now, ultimately, if you care about animal welfare and you care about training the most compassionate way that you can, understanding that removal of the trigger makes your dog feel safe is like the crux of the whole issue here. You know, like you can give them cookies all day, but if they don't feel safe, you're not helping them. They're gonna feel worse over time. And so then R+ trainers, we use this other language of functional reinforcer, and we talk around the topic, and so it's never really that clear in the conversation when we're having it, that this is R minus. You are presenting a trigger that makes your dog uncomfortable, and then you're taking it away at the right time in order to provide relief or a feeling of safety, which is really important for our dogs. And then, so of course, some people will be like, well, your dog should never feel uncomfortable or unsafe. But if you have a dog who's afraid of the nail trimmers or is barking at other dogs or is afraid of the vets, like there is no version of that trigger that doesn't cause some form of anxiety. And so now we're in the desensitization world. Is that making sense,
Yeah.
Cori? Am I completely going off on one?
No, that completely makes sense, and I had the word relief in my head too, so you beat me to what I was going to say in response. But yeah, I feel like there's this positive packaging of the concept of relief that's like relief is a reward, so that makes it positive reinforcement, and it's like, bestie, finish the sentence, you're saying relief from pressure and now you're actually just saying a balanced trainer sentence, which I mean obviously brings into question what the labels really mean, right? Like if we're being honest and talking about not just positive reinforcement, and versions of this exist for negative punishment too, where it's just like the refusal to acknowledge the reality of the training technique that you are using. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think obviously there's been a lot of euphemisms in all sides of dog training for a long time, and I think this is one version of that, but I'm glad to hear you speak on it because I know that there's lots of people that will listen to it from you and not necessarily from me.
Well, and maybe vice versa. I do feel like sometimes when I talk about negative reinforcement and how important it is and how important opt-outs are, like when I'm teaching cooperative care, I always start with an opt-out, which is just negative reinforcement, before I do a start button. And when I'm talking to R plus trainers, especially R plus trainers who are a little bit more like newer in their journey, they're like fresh out of KPA or something, there is some pushback over the use of R minus because of where it lives in the humane hierarchy. Like it's quite far down the list of the things that we quote unquote should be doing. And so I really do feel like it's being kind of baked into all of the other protocols that we do as this kind of, we just don't talk about it. Like we're all doing it, but we don't talk about it. We're all doing P minus, but we don't talk about it. Like if you're shaping and you are choosing to move up a criteria level, you are choosing to no longer reinforce what was reinforced, and now you're waiting for like a slightly different version of the behavior in order to reinforce it. That is just P minus. Like you are using P minus to kind of surf up the criteria shaping pathway. And we use that all the time. And so, but people don't talk about the R minus or the P minus of it all. They're just talking about like, well, when we're shaping, you add like, I think, I'm completely going off on so many different tangents now. This is like a favorite subject of mine to think about. But have you ever seen Ken Ramirez's LRS, least reinforcing scenario? Speaking of like euphemisms for what we're doing.
I don't. I know who that is, and I've seen him do other stuff, but I don't remember a least reinforcing scenario.
Okay, so let me set the scene for you. So the least reinforcing scenario is what to do if your dog makes an error. So if your dog makes an error, you're supposed to have like a very small time penalty and then a reset. So you're basically giving the dog a chance to earn a treat another way. So like, for example, if you ask for... I don't know, let's make it simple. Let's say you ask for a down and your dog gets confused and does a sit. Then you maybe wait like 2 seconds and then you cue a touch, which your dog knows and will like do 100% of the time. And then you can reinforce the touch. And then that just gives you a way of like breaking up the session and then starting again. Like you probably changed your strategy. But when I was reading about the least reinforcement scenario, I was just like, or the least reinforcing scenario, I was just like, is this not just P minus? Are we not just adding a time penalty? And I think the argument is no, we're not just not reinforcing and adding a time penalty. The thing that makes it different is the redirection at the end, which kind of it rescues the frustration from the application of P minus. But like, why are we calling it this? Can we not just say like, do a P minus for like 2 to 5 seconds and then redirect your dog so they don't flip their biscuit? Like, can we call it what it is rather than making up all these fancy terms that then, of course, people who aren't looking in under the hood and asking themselves, because I always ask myself, like, well, how does that work? You know, like, why is this working? And I feel like a lot of trainers are not asking themselves that. Like, if I see a balance trainer training a dog on a e-collar, and a bunch of people in the Instagram comments are like, this will never work because the dog is being trained through aversives or whatever, I'm not out there like immediately viscerally having a reaction to that. I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, how is it working? And the vast majority of times, and this is where like I will like advocate for positive reinforcement for a second here, the vast majority of times where I see an aversive trainer being really successful is when they've employed the first principles of dog training really well, and they're usually using a lot of positive reinforcement or desensitization or counter conditioning or something else. So I'm able to like look at a scenario like that and go under the hood and be like, well, why is this working? You know? And I think that a lot of trainers don't do that. They just kind of look at the surface level and then believe what's in the caption, or go like, oh, this isn't P- because it's actually an LRS, or this isn't R- because it's actually a constructional approach. And it's like, well, actually, everything is a wibbly wobbly mess of different techniques that people are doing all the time. And sometimes what they say they are doing is not actually what they are actually doing, like what's actually working underneath the hood. So I think a little bit of critical thinking is necessary, especially on social media these days.
And
oh my god,
that directly ties back to what I don't even remember what we said earlier, but it's about the idea that if you're not thinking critically about specific techniques, the important thing to me probably is that you're never going to be able to generalize that really well, or if you're just kind of blindly using these techniques without understanding how they work, like you're inevitably gonna mess up because you just don't get it.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. Yeah. And I find that there's the people who get it, like, this is why we're friends, is because you get this stuff, and we've always been able to have these really good conversations about, like, well, how does this actually work? Like, what is actually going on in this video, or what is actually happening, behaviorally speaking, in this like BMOD plan? Like, what we've always been able to kind of deconstruct that and get to the bottom of it, and I feel like that's quite a rare skill, and I think that that's what makes people good dog trainers versus like not so good dog trainers. I don't think it's about being positive reinforcement or force free or a clicker trainer or balanced, or, you know, I've even seen some aversive, like pretty aversive horse trainers who are like talking a big game on like punishment and leadership and like putting your horse in their place, and like they're actually using very soft R- the whole time,
and they're connected with their animal, and they're very in tune and observant, and that's like the most important thing that's going on in that situation, regardless of what they're saying.
I think the human labels are kind of clouding the water here. Like, we need to really look at what's going on, because like you and I probably train much more similarly than we don't, you know. I think you and I have more in common than me and like any other, or like me and like someone who's maybe a less practiced R+ trainer, and likewise you with someone who's just slapping a prong on everything because they don't know what else to do. So yeah, and I've always felt that way. I've really felt that these labels don't really serve us. There's definitely like we have more in common than we do different.
Yeah.
And just generally speaking, what makes someone a really good trainer is that nuanced understanding of the first principles of dog training. And that should be the label. It's like, are you a good trainer or not? Not if, are you a balanced trainer, or are you a positive reinforcement trainer? Like, do you actually understand what you're doing or not? Like, that's the difference.
Yeah, totally. That checks out to me. I told you this story a little bit online already, but I just want to say it on the podcast too, which is that I basically brought up that negative reinforcement example, or those specifics, in a job interview when I was in Portland. And basically it was an interview where the person who was interviewing me, and like, keep in mind I'm in this scenario being like, please somebody give me money, like I want a job so bad, and I still couldn't stop myself from talking. They basically asked me, I don't remember how they phrased it, but they were like, are you cool with only ever using positive reinforcement? And I was like, well, nobody does that. Like, what are you talking about? And she's like, what are you saying? And I could have said anything, I guess, in that moment, but I started talking about leash reactivity. You give your dog a break from a situation, and that's inherently negative reinforcement, and her eyelid started twitching, and it continued to twitch for the rest of the interview. I don't even remember what she said to me, but I remember it was like cartoon smoke was coming out of her ears, and like in real life her actual eye started twitching, and I was not offered a job at the end, after that interview.
I mean, I'm sorry, and also you probably did dodge a bullet.
Of course, yeah.
I have a strong feeling that your listeners are probably not that R+ leaning in general. Like, I have a feeling that I'm pretty safe in talking about this stuff with you guys, because I think your listeners are seeking a more nuanced understanding of things. But I will say, like, there does seem to be this attitude in the R+ world where if you break a cardinal rule, you're like shunned. Like if for example, like prong collars are a big one. Like if someone sees you training a dog with a prong collar, like you are a pariah to that community now. And this hasn't happened to me directly, but it has happened to some of my friends where they'll have a client whose dog is on a prong collar, and that's how they feel safe, the client. And so rather than coming in and being like, well, we're going to take the prong collar off and we're going to use clicker training only, what they'll do is they'll typically put the prong collar on a different leash. So it's there as a backup, and then they'll have their harness on or whatever, and they'll be working on their system. But the dog is still wearing the prong collar because the human handler likes to have it there to feel safe, because that's how they felt safe for like the last X number of years they've been training their dog. And of course, like if you get caught doing this by another R+ trainer, if they see you and they take a picture of you, God forbid, like you are like dead to that community. Like it's a real problem. And so I do think there's this attitude in the R+ world where like if you say anything controversial, like sometimes I use R- in my training, or like I think it's okay to have a prong on a backup leash for an owner who really feels insecure without it, or like anything like that, then you get in serious trouble from the R+ people. And I'll tell you what it feels like. I used to be vegan in university. I was vegan for probably about 7 years. And when I was vegan, like the amount of, if you have purchased a pair of leather shoes that you got in a thrift store or you found in the dumpster, like you're not vegan anymore. Like they take your vegan card away and then they get really angry at you. Like it feels like the same thing, and it's like, why are we fighting each other? Like, can we not all just agree that like we're trying our best, we're trying to help people, we're trying to meet people where they're at? Like ultimately we can have a discussion about why I made the decisions that I've made. I'm happy to do that because I am making decisions based purely on the best welfare and care of the dog, which like we should all be able to agree on. But like they're like, no, I don't want to discuss it. I just want to ban you immediately. Yeah. Like, and especially on social media, you see a lot of that. Like someone will post a really pretty picture of their dog and they're wearing an e-collar in the forest or something, and then there's no comments on like how nice the dog is or what a beautiful scene. It's just all like, you're a piece of scum for putting an e-collar in we don't even know any context. Like why? And a lot of the time it's just a tracker. It's like a GPS tracker. And it's like, why are we so aggro on the internet about this? Can we not just calm down?
People are extremely insane about it. I don't know if I've ever said this to you explicitly, but that's a major factor in why I left Portland, Oregon, was because that was the dominant culture there. And it's not like that here in Chicago. For sure there are some people that are like that, but I think I'll have to decide if I want to go public about this. But I think in general, Portland is more of a place of theoretical ideology, and Chicago is a pragmatic, like grounded culture. Dog training and just regular human stuff too. And so I was shocked when I moved to Portland, because I was like, you guys are alien. The dog trainers, like, you guys are aliens to me. Like what kind of freak moves through the world like this? Okay, we talked about horses, we talked about dog training culture and specifics, but let's talk about your actual dogs now. So
right.
you have a poodle and a doodle, and
Sure
I
do.
obviously need to ask you how you got a doodle or how you ended up with one, and I'm also curious how you feel about doodle bashing. Doodles get a lot of hate these days, and I'll just come up front and say that I feel pretty maybe this sounds crazy, but I feel pretty neutrally about doodle bashing. I think the critiques of doodles I see a lot of times with purebred dogs in general, so I don't feel very strongly about it one way or the other.
Yeah, I think, again, this is like why you and me can be friends, because if you felt pretty strongly about doodles being, you know, like, awful, you would never have reached out to me on Instagram, and we would never have connected. So my backstory for getting a doodle is, once upon a time I was an academic in science, and I had a really bad crash out of science. Like, I was in a really bad place. My work had been published by another university. I was really struggling to find passion in what I was doing, and I ultimately quit my job. I was a postdoc at the time, so I'd earned my PhD and I was in research, and I just could not continue. So as you can imagine, I was in a pretty bad place. I was unemployed. I didn't know what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. It felt like a huge, awful decision to not be in science anymore. And so I thought, well, I've got some time, I should rescue a dog. And that's initially what I wanted to do, was to rescue a dog, which should have been very simple. I knew enough to know that I didn't want, like, one of those random McRescue dogs that, like I knew enough at the time to know that one of the biggest rescues in Toronto is pretty sketchy, and has had, like, a lot of, you know, they will give out anyone a dog without any background checks, but also they won't screen the dog beforehand. So they've had a couple of, I shouldn't really, I don't want to be, like, getting into defamation lawsuits or whatever, but, like, I'm sure you know the type of rescue that I'm talking about, where the dogs come straight off a bus and you collect them. Like, there's no screening, there's no, like, foster period where they assess the dog for you, there's no, like, shelter step, like, that kind of thing. So I didn't want that. I knew that, like, there is a risk to just taking a dog straight off a plane, and so that ruled out a lot of the, like, easily accessible rescue dogs that I wanted. What I was doing is I was looking at breed-specific rescues, and I was looking at the SPCA. And of course, the SPCA didn't give me a dog, because they were very popular, and, like, they, at the time, and this is years ago, like, you had to refresh the page every day at a certain time of day to see which dogs were suddenly available, and then you had to hoof it to the the shelter,
it's
and
like
pick
Taylor
them up.
Swift tickets.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. And so I'd gone, like, I'd found a dog, and I'd gone same day, like an hour later, several times, but they wouldn't release the dog to me without, like, my husband being present for some reason. They were like, no, all members of the house. Yeah, it was nuts. So I had a really hard time rescuing. And then the breed-specific people were weird. They were like, do you have a backyard? Do you have a job? Like, do you have the... And so, like, a lot of them also sent me, like, very polite, like, rejection notices of just, like, we don't think it's the right time for you to have a dog. So, like, on the one hand, I probably, like, I was not in a good place in my life, so I was probably giving, like, chaotic crash out energy. Like, I don't blame the rescues and the decisions they were making. And also, I wanted a dog. And so what I did was, as you do, like, when you're at the end of your tether and you've tried, like, all the legitimate avenues, you go on to, like, Craigslist, and you're like, well, what's available? And so someone on Craigslist was like, I have these puppies, and my dad's got cancer, and I can't, like, I'm just helping him, like, rehome his puppies. It was a wild ad. It was obviously, like, a front for a puppy mill, but I went anyway, and I collected my dog, and it was Percy.
Oh my God.
And I brought him home, same day from Craigslist. And later, like, many years later, I actually discovered there's, like, a support group for this particular puppy mill. And it's very interesting, because, like, when you get a dog from a puppy mill, like, you obviously have to be kind of led a little bit. Like, no one goes to the mill itself and they, like, look at all the dogs in wire crates and they're like, yes, this is for me. So when I went to go and get Percy, what the guy had told me is that his dad's dog had a litter, and his dad has cancer, and he just can't be, and he lives in the countryside, and they thought that it would be easier to rehome the dogs in the city, and so they brought all these puppies over to rehome them, which obviously is like obviously a crock of bullshit. But by the time I was there and he was telling me this story, like, I had a puppy in my hands, and I was like, you know what, I will take this, thank you. But I found later there was like a Facebook support group where there was like a picture of I guess the dad dog that was shown to everyone. There were probably hundreds of different dad dogs, but they showed the stud dog or whatever to everyone, the same guy. And there's like hundreds of us. So it's disappointing. And there's like people who, like, if they're rehoming older dogs, the scam on Kijiji is like, we bought this puppy for my son and it turns out he's allergic. Like, if they don't sell by 8 weeks, 9 weeks, then it's like, you see the Craigslist ad and it's like, yeah, we bought this dog a couple of weeks ago, my son's allergic, so we have to sell him or whatever. And it's Kijiji, so it's just accessible and easy and cheap, and you can go, and it was just, listen, ultimately, I don't condone what I did. I did a terrible thing. I had a moment of weakness in a really bad place in my life, and I did the thing where I got a very accessible dog. And ultimately, this is what Doodles are for me. Doodles are extremely accessible. Nobody's checking where you live. Nobody's checking your employment status. Nobody's asking about your husband. Nobody cares. Like, if you want a doodle, there is a person out there who will give you a doodle. And there's something nice about that. Like, there's something deeply necessary about not being classist or racist or weird or sexist and just giving the person a dog. Like, there's an element, like, maybe not for every breed, no one should be doing that with like Malinois or whatever, but like,
yeah,
that's why Doodles are popular, man. Like, there's no barrier to entry. You just go and collect one, and there's something needed with that. Now, would I do it again? No. I know that like half of these dogs have major health issues. Some of these dogs have behavioral issues, but on the whole, Doodles are actually fairly well adjusted, considering, right? Like, considering they don't have like a bunch of really nerdy breeder types who are husbanding the gene pool and like really carefully selecting for temperament, considering they don't have that, they're actually doing fine. Like, there's so many Doodles out there in pet dog homes that are very well loved and just living their best life, and they're doing well. Like, and they don't pretend to be, I mean, I suppose they do pretend to be like, I don't think they pretend to be like a fancy designer dog anymore. I don't think anyone actually believes that. They're just accessible, they're easy to get hold of, and they're, generally speaking, decent family dogs.
Yeah.
And I agree with you in anything that you say about Doodles also applies to purebred dogs and fatty breeding. So like, if you say to me, yes, but like, consider all the health issues in Doodles, it's like, yeah, but like, also look at those backyard bred Frenchies they can't breathe. And that's not because Frenchies can't breathe in general. Like, some of the well-bred ones absolutely can, because their breeder people are taking care of that. But there are some monstrous examples of Frenchie kind of backyard breeding that has caused them to not be able to function as dogs anymore. And then if you say to me, well, you know, like, having a dog be easily accessible is bad because we're not like vetting homes, like, that becomes problematic in terms of like, well, how do you vet people?
For sure.
And like,
I've indirectly worked with rescues who have rescued a dog that has then been reclaimed by a family, and they would not give it back to the family because that family was lower income, happen to be people of color, happening to be living in neighborhoods, you know, that mostly have people with both of those variables. And I also have friends who have been denied for cats by rescues because they worked and were students, and then they went and bought a cat on Craigslist too, because they're like, I've already decided I want a cat. Like, that part is done. Like, you can't. That is super interesting. And then going back to the like problems with Doodles thing, I'll say too, like, a lot of people, and like I have also seen this, point out they often have digestive problems, they often have structural issues and joint issues, and they are prone maybe to anxiety, reactivity, stranger danger. Those are all traits I associate with showline German Shepherds. And I see a lot of showline German Shepherds too. So it's really like, yes, obviously it would be a lot better if we didn't have those things, but people also are, the doodle hate has gotten to a weird place, I think.
I think part of it is how common they are. Like, people see doodles with problems and assume that doodles have problems, but ultimately, like, I don't know, 60% plus of the clients I see are doodles, and then, like, everyone else is a breed of some kind. So, like, of course the doodles have, by the numbers, the largest amount of problems because they just are the majority. Right? Like, and when you actually look at it, like, the number of doodles who are, like, in shelters is relatively low. Or if you look at, like, the number of doodles who have issues to the point of, like, I don't know, like, top 3 weird behavior cases are, for me, are, like, not doodles.
Oh, me too, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I have lots of doodle regulars all the time that I love, to be clear. And what's nice about them, too, is that they're soft dogs. Like, I also own a Dutch Shepherd, and he has made me really appreciate a soft dog. My Dutchie is a dog who, in many situations, physical correction is not the answer because there is little that I could do that would make an impact on him. He just does not care. And it's nice to have a dog who gives a shit what you think about something, and you know, if you need to physically interrupt a situation, the dog is not going to be immune to that. That's something that I really appreciate now after having a Dutch Shepherd.
I believe it. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. You said that you have a funny Percy story for us, or I wanted to call it R plus gone wrong, and you said that may or may not be accurate.
It's not really accurate. It's my training gone wrong. It's not the fault of the technique, but it's one of those things I really wanted to tell you about because it's one of those things where you're given a protocol and you follow it blindly, assuming that if you trust the process, it'll work. But, like, without the nuanced understanding of what's going on under the hood, it breaks. So you will appreciate this. Like, I had just gotten my doodle. I got on Craigslist. I collected my tiny Venice puppy. I lived in Toronto in, like, a very small condo. And, of course, like, he is very high drive, and he's also very curious, which I love about him, and he's just a bit of a mischief. Like, he's always looking for something to do. He's very like drivey, I guess, or enrichment seeking.
Cockapoos are probably one of my favorite doodle crosses too, or spoodles in general. Like, they're kind of crazy sometimes because of the spaniel part.
Yeah. I love that. So, like, there's a piece of me that's like, maybe I should get spaniel next. But anyway, so I love that about him. But he was, when he was a little puppy, absolutely nuts. Eleanor, by the way, easiest puppy I've ever had. Just came in, slept all time, learned to pee outside within, like, a day. Very straightforward. Percy, on the other hand, was, like, always interacting with things around him and then evaluating to see what effect that would have, which is, like, if you're a trainer, that's pretty cool. But so he'd do things like he'd knock things off the coffee table, and then I'd come and, like, put the thing back on the coffee table and talk to him when he was doing it. Or, like, I would go onto my computer and he would bark at me, and I would go and, you know, redirect him to some other activity. And so pretty quickly he became, and I should just couch this by saying this is before I was a dog trainer, so I didn't know what I was doing.
I was figuring that out too.
You know, like, just so you all know, I don't do that stuff now. I know better. But at the time, I was just like any old regular new puppy parent struggling along through life, struggle busing a high drive breed. And so I was always giving him stuff to do, and he was always, like, looking for stuff to do. And I was watching Emily Larlam at the time, Kiko Pup, on YouTube, because I was really into, like, her training, and I still am. I think she's one very talented trainer, and a lot of what she does makes tons of sense to me. However, she had one video on the positive interrupter, which was, if you see your dog is about to do something that they shouldn't, make a little kissy noise, like and then redirect them to something else, or you can give them a treat. And so it's like having a clicker sound, but like to prevent them from doing unwanted behavior. So as you can imagine, I took this and I started using it without any other like fair pair. You know, when you use this, you're supposed to have some other training mechanism in place, like you're like Kathy Sadeo's Smart 25 or Smart 50 or whatever, where you're feeding good behaviors.
It's supposed to be like a damage control, like...
Exactly. It's not a first port of call. It's a damage control. It's a what to do if you done goofed, you know, then you can do this thing. But of course, I'd only watched the video independently, and so I was using this. So I just want to clarify, like, no shade to Kiko Pup. Emily Larlam is amazing, and I misinterpreted her positive interrupter technique, and I used it badly, and I actually ended up shaping my dog to do all kinds of weird stuff. And one of the weird things that I had shaped him to do is he learned if I was on my laptop, and also I was pairing this with ignoring him a lot of the time as well, if he was being a menace. And so if I was on my laptop, he learned that if he picked up the laptop cable, I would have to do something about it. So I would have to like take it out of his mouth and like redirect him to something. And so I was using the positive interrupter for that. I'd see him look at my cable and I'd positive interrupter and I'd give him a toy or I'd get him to do something else. And so the behavior of interacting with my laptop cable increased in frequency. It got worse. And so I started using my laptop without the cable in. Like I would charge it, and then when I went to actually use it, I would take it off the battery power. And my dog is so friggin' smart. Like, he would go to the wall socket where it used to be plugged in and, like, interact with the wall socket. And there was a point where I was like, do I interrupt? Like, because I'd started to understand, like, the interrupter is not helping. Like, it's making things worse. So I should probably stop using it and start doing other things. And so it got to the point where I was ignoring him when he was interacting with the wall socket. And he was starting to, like, stick his tongue out and lick it. And so, like, I just shaped him. I was like, you're going to kill yourself. So I had to go out. I bought, like, child-safe electrical socket covers for all of my sockets. And, yeah, I tell the story sometimes. My dog, it's a combo of, like, my dog is really smart. And also, I was not a smart trainer at that time because I wasn't fully understanding what I was doing or how things worked, you know? And that's what really got me into this of, like, well, how does this work sometimes and not all the time? And, like, how did it fail for me? And, like, what should I do instead? And how does behavior even work? You know? And then I got really interested in all of this stuff. But it's just a funny story because I think for most dogs, if you use a positive interrupter, you probably can't shape a wall socket licking behavior. Like, that's an absurd sequence of events, but from the combination of like my timing being really good and also Percy's curiosity being really intense, and then also like in combination with extinction because I'm not using the positive interrupter all of a sudden, like we just created this sequence of events which took us to the wildest place of like him licking walls and electrical sockets. So anyway, that was my funny story.
That's so funny, and I can't help but just think like, wow, what a creative thinker. Like that story makes it so obvious why he's fun to do trick training with, because he's
right. And this was him at like 10, 12 weeks, right? Like this, he was a tiny baby
sitting
when
there.
He hadn't lost his teeth yet.
He's sitting there just like slowly bringing his tongue out and like squinting at you and being like, so do you like this, Mom?
Yep, exactly. He's like, is this the thing that'll get you to come over and give me attention?
Yeah.
You know? And you can see just from that story, like, he is a very talented dog. Like, that's why I've been able... That talent that he has for exploring different behaviors and, like, being able to try different stuff, like, that's not something I created in him. He was kind of born with it. And that has led us to be able to train some really cool tricks. Like, you know, he plays Connect 4 and Jenga, and he does all the balancing tricks, and he's very, very talented in that way, but it's not something that I feel like I can take credit for because he's just born like that, which is one of the reasons why I won't bash a doodle, because my dog is a doodle and he's incredible, you know. I will be looking a long time for another dog who shows that kind of talent.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, when I tried to shape Cupid, he's like, should I hit it with my face? And I'm like, no. And he's like, then I should hit it with my paws.
Obviously, he needs to hit it with
Yeah,
something.
there's got to be some kind of smashing involved, so he's not really that fun to shape.
Right?
Yeah. Wow,
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, well, I think we'll end on the the awesome reputation note of your doodle licking wall sockets, if you're all right with that.
Yeah, I'm alright with that. It tracks, honestly.
This was great, and yeah, if I'll let you do your plugs, but I'll also just what's the right word? Not advocate. Advertise them, give them my seal of approval that your Instagram is
Amazing.
very cool, and Percy does some really, really cool tricks. I've kind of been not on social media as much, so I don't remember how many cool tricks Ella's doing, but I'm sure.
Almost none. She looks very pretty, and she is mostly able to self-regulate now, which is great.
Cool. Yeah, do you want to plug your stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So I co-own with my very good friend the dog school in Vancouver. So if anyone's in Vancouver, BC, and they want to come train with us, we're the dog school. And then on Instagram, the two that are probably interesting, depending on what people want, my dog's account is at Prancing Poodles. And then I also have an account for my horse, which is at Believe in Neve. And Neve is spelled Niamh, so Believe in Neve, but it's a Gaelic name, so it's spelled like that. So that's how to find me.
Cool. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for being my
No problem,
software
Cori.
tester too.